So I got this first lock done, and I still have it in a couple pieces here because I wanted to show you how it all goes together. There's a little stub that I told you was going to stick out of the tumbler. Hopefully you can see that. And there's the notch that's cut through the tumbler to allow it to rotate properly from one end to the other of its full rotation. Okay. Down here in the bridle, I drilled and tapped for a screw, and then, as you can see, there's a secondary spring sticking out here, and that's the spring that's going to work the intercepting sear. I'm going to put this together real quick and hopefully show you how it all works. So there it is in the full cock position. You can see the intercepting sear here. If I turn it up this way, you can see both sears. The actual firing sear and then the intercepting sear here. Kind of an odd shape, but that's what it took to get around everything and give it the right engagement angle. So a little bit of work to shape that. And then the way this works is, so here it is in the full cock. And you can see that the tumbler's engaged into a little notch there in the intercepting sear. So let's say that the stocking safety is disengaged and not applied, and the guy pulls the trigger, and for some reason there's enough recoil or some other thing happens, and the intercepting sear, the full cock sear gets dislodged from its notch. You can see that it drops forward just a little bit, but that the intercepting sear catches the tumbler in that notch and everything stays in position, and the guy can still fire it just by continuing to pull the trigger. It allows it to come out of that notch. So, and then as it goes back up and you engage the half cock and the full cock, it drops right back into that notch. The spring return just the way the other sear works. So pretty simple arrangement. The only reason I'm holding my hand here is push both of them at the same time. I don't want this hammer to gouge up the side of the lock plate. So I'm trying to be real careful here and only push the one sear so that you can see how it's happening. There you go. So if it's in the full cock though, and the guy wants to fire it properly, the pulling the trigger will work both sears at the same time, and you can see it's got a little clearance there that allows it to bring it on down past it. So that's the ideal situation. Took me about a day to make this part, the spring, and get everything fitted properly, make these adjustments to the bridle and to the tumbler. Took about a full day's worth of work to make this one side here. And now I've got to still the other lock plate, get the intercepting sear on the other lock. And so there's quite a little bit of work to get it fitted properly, get it working properly, make sure it's catching properly. But it's a super important little safety device that really just does its job really well. So that's the idea of an intercepting sear. The only other thing I need to do is, as I mentioned earlier, I need to polish up a couple more parts. I need to go ahead and finish polishing up and cleaning up the parts I just made. And then the sear arms, both of them, will have to be filed down together so that they're at the same height at a level plane to where the trigger bar is. And then I can trim them to length and make everything even. But that's the way it's going to work. And now I've got to make another one just like it. So there we have it, a matched pair of locks. This other one didn't take me quite a full day. It only took me about 7 hours, something like that. But that's all the safety features I could really cram into theirs. So it's got a half cock notch, a stocking safety, and an intercepting sear. A left and a right lock for a double rifle. And that's basically the way they're built. I showed you all the parts a minute ago on the other one before I built this one. And this one's built the same exact way. Spring, bridle's cut in, and a new intercepting sear is put in place and hand fitted. It takes quite a bit of time to get the clearances just right and get the hand fitting, and particularly the part where it'll catch good and solid and hold every time, but then release as well. So it's kind of a tough fit up, and it takes a lot of time to do that, but if you get it right, it really works well. Makes a really good safety feature, and really is a nice little added bonus to a traditional lock. So that's it for the metalwork for now. There is a few other little things to do in the metalworking department. I'll need to make a sling swivel for the wood in the stock, for the butt stock, to match the one that's on the barrels. Of course, ribs will have to be made, and the front sight will have to be, front sight face will have to be fitted, and a front sight will have to be made for it. But for the most part, that's it for the metalworking. This is all I need now to get started on the woodworking, and so that's going to be my next step, is to do some layout on a piece of stock blank and start inletting the action into it. Well, let's talk wood for just a minute. This is the stock blank that's going to go on the 2-bore, and wanted to kind of give you an idea of why this blank's being used. Typically in a classic English gun it'd usually be walnut, but this is a piece of sugar maple, rock maple, also called rock maple. And the reason this blank's being selected and used for this, and I usually recommend maple for the 2-bores. The reason is maple tends to be harder and denser than walnut, and in a gun that weighs as much as these weigh and recoils as much as they recoil, character, figure, and the prettiness of a stock, I guess you'd call it, the character and figure of the stock, is secondary to the strength of the stock. This particular blank took me quite a bit of time to find. For one thing, this blank is 3 inches thick, which makes it kind of a rarity in the stock blank world. Not too many guys run their mill at 3 inches wide for stock blanks. Typically you find them in 2 1/4 to 2 1/2, and somewhere in that range usually. So to get that extra half an inch means you have to come up with somebody who's cutting a special blank or mantle pieces or stuff like that. So that extra half an inch makes a difference, though, when you're starting out with an action that's 2 inches wide at the widest part of the tang. You need that extra half an inch to work in a cheek piece and to work in, cast off and that kind of thing. So to get a proper fit, you need an extra wide blank, wider than the widest part of your gun you're going to put in it, and so this is kind of hard to come by, these blanks that are this size. The other thing that's special about this blank is this piece is super dense. The grain structure in it, and I'll tip it on end here and hopefully you'll be able to see it, but the grain structure in this thing, if I can get it somewhere close here, yeah, maybe, is really tight. I mean, the grain is really super tight rings, and this blank is just super heavy and dense, and so it's kind of a special piece. I had to do a little hunting around, call a few different suppliers to find it. It is quarter sawn, but it's unfortunately not the best piece of quarter sawn. It's very good in the fact that the grain runs very straight through it, and it dips slightly where the pistol grip would be. So that's a very good grain structure for the stock. Very tight, very dense, and has a nice curve to it through the grip and buttstock. So it's going to be a very good piece. But this piece particularly was taken from towards the outside edge of the tree, and I'll show you that. This is bark right here, and this is a little bark inclusion in here, and if you look right here, this is a bark inclusion, and you can see that there's a couple of little checks in it right here. So this section right here is pretty much unusable, because I know if I tried to make the pistol grip right in this area, I know I'd run into these inclusions inside the wood, and there's no real way to tell how deep they go. Obviously it runs from here clear up to here, and you can see where inclusion comes in through here. So obviously it takes up at least this much of the blank through here, which is fine because this blank's extra wide and extra long and extra thick, so I'll be able to offset and start the blank up here in the top for the butt section, and hopefully I'll be able to remove that and it'll just won't be part of this blank. But this piece was kind of hard to come by, and getting these pieces that are thick and dense like this are real tough. But it's important that I find these pieces, and I've even got a couple of suppliers that are now starting to cut them for me, the width and stuff that I need, and get them drying. I've had them for a couple of years now. I've got, well, from the time that I did the first 2-bore, I've had a couple guys cutting these for me a little extra wide and getting them dried for me. So by the time I'm ready to do another one of these, I'll have a blank that's ready to go. But finding this stuff that's like this is getting kind of tough these days. And like I said, you know, character and figure, a lot of stocks are real pretty. You know, they got a really nice figure to them, really nice quilting in them, and you know, some really good obvious, you know, look to them, but that character is not the defining factor in a gun this size. In a gun this size, the defining factor is the structure of the wood and the grain structure and the density of the wood to handle the recoil and keep the stock, you know, carrying the weight of the action and everything without pulling screws and breaking stuff under recoil and chipping out the stock. So this blank is going to work real good for this, and when it's stained, you know, it'll be stained to the customer's desire, or as close as I can get it. Obviously with staining wood, it's really more up to God than it is to the guy who's staining it, but you can get it close usually, and so this will be stained to his, you know, as close to what he wants as I can get it, and it'll be a real nice structural piece for this gun. Other guns, you get into smaller calibers, you know, especially things that don't have heavy recoil, you can get away with using a lot of softer hardwoods. You know, guns come in factory, a lot of factory guns are birch or beech. You get up into some nice custom stuff, you get into claros and Bastogne walnuts and things like that, and they have tons of figure in them, and they're real attractive stocks and really finish out well. Problem with most of those woods is they're just not very hard, they're not very dense. So to get a piece of walnut that's as hard and dense as this piece of maple, you basically have to go to a Turkish walnut, and anybody who's priced a piece of Turkish walnut out lately can tell you that the stuff is not cheap to come by. The price difference between this and a piece of Turkish this size is the piece of Turkish is about 4 times as expensive as this blank. So you know, for budget considerations, even though this is a very high-end gun and very expensive, it's still a budget issue when you're talking about putting, you know, possibly throw several $1,000s into the piece of wood versus, you know, $250 or so into a piece of wood. So it's a consideration that needs to be looked at when you're considering a custom gun. But for these 2 bores, this really dense hard sugar maple works really good for this, and then of course, you know, you can stain it out and make it look pretty nice. This blank has a little bit of figure in it. It's got a little bit of quilting and a little bit of figure in it, but it's not very much. Mostly it's just straight grained and really dense, and that's what I was looking for. So anyways, that's my little 2-bit rant on wood for this morning. I will get this laid out, and then I'll bandsaw it out to a rough shape, and I'll bandsaw out the forearm piece out of this section up here probably, and I'll attach a ebony block to the end of it. A couple of dowels pinned it in, and then epoxy it on really good and solid and let it sit so it has several days to cure, and I'll start working on the buttstock and getting the action inlet into the buttstock. So that's where we're at, and I'll get going on this blank. Now that I have this roughed out, hopefully I'll be able to show you a little of the grain structure in this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spray it with a little bit of water here, because it'll make it contrast a little better. You'll be able to see it, hopefully. If you can really see these lines here, you'll see that the grain basically is 90 degrees to the action face, to where the action is going to butt up against it here, and then it slightly turns, follows the curve down, and the grain comes out roughly 90 degrees to the butt. And that's kind of what I'm looking for, is I want a grain that goes from, you know, perpendicular to the action to perpendicular to the butt, so that it follows that curve down from there to there. I'll turn it up on end here and let you see how tight the grain structure is on this. Hopefully it'll show up a little bit. Maybe. Anyways, if you can see it, the grain structure is really tightly, densely packed together. Really tight rings in the tree basically, and so this makes for a pretty heavy stock. Don't be getting the idea that these are figure or anything in here, because it really isn't. That's saw marks from where it was sawed at the mill, and that'll go away. And then later on, when it's, you know, mostly done, we'll get to see what the kind of figure it really has. But so don't get the wrong idea that this might be a little bit of figure in here, because it's not. But what I did want to show you was just the structure of the grain and the flow. and give you an idea of how that's going to work. So that's basically roughed out. It's oversized in every direction. It's taller than the action, so I can work down to the action after it's inlet. It's wider through here, so that I can work down to the grip cap. It's taller back here than the recoil pad that's going to go on it. So pretty much in every dimension it is wider, thicker, and taller than it needs to be right now. And then of course I also cut out just a chunk from the same piece. Basically took it from just a little ahead of where the action is, so that the grain flow will basically match the pattern, so that it all looks, you know, continuously one piece. And that piece will of course get the ebony put on the end of it and epoxied on, and then I can start shaping some of this stuff out. And my main focus is going to be doing layout next, and then inletting the action to it. So that's where I'm at for now, and I'll get on with it. So the next step after it's roughed out is to do a little layout work. Most of these lines are just for me to get a rough sense of how things are going to look. I'm one of those people who can visualize things in my head and know how they're going to turn out when they're finished. So just drawing the cheek piece and the thumb cut and stuff like that on here gives me kind of a rough idea of what it's going to look like when it's finished. The actual layout lines, the real ones, the ones that I actually use, are these center lines with the cast off and whatnot. This top one here just gives me an idea of how the top of the comb is going to lay down. Customer requested in this case a wider comb at the face of it here. He wanted a little more in the upper section here, and so this one will be wider than a normal English gun. You know, most English guns taper down pretty thin to the point of the comb, but this one's going to be wider. Did the layout for the butt pad, and this will be a pack mirror decelerator. It'll be the 750B or 752B. It's the one that's not quite English style, it's slightly more American style, but it's the biggest pack mirror decelerator they make basically. And so that'll be on here. Light's not worth the crap today. Layout lines for center line on the bottom and through the grip, and then this is the Dakota grip cap laid out on here. So those are my basic layouts. That gives me an idea of where my center lines are, where I'm going to work to, and so the rest of this, these cheek piece lines and thumb piece line and whatnot, those are just kind of personal references so that I get an idea of how things are going to look when they're done. And the comb lines out here are kind of just a personal reference for how it's going to look too. So, but these primary lines are the ones that are important. So you're probably wondering how I actually get the measurements to lay out the stock. I use an old English method. It's what I was taught by the man I apprenticed under. And it's a basic set of body measurements and then a set of working formulas that convert those measurements into actual stock measurements. In the case of this particular rifle though, I didn't really have to do any of that. The guy who this rifle is going to, my customer, has a rifle, custom-made rifle, built by the man I apprenticed under. So the simple answer was, since that gun's fitted for him, and he has several other guns that are custom-made fitted rifles, the easy answer was to take the measurements off of a fitted rifle that actually is already measured and fitted to work for him, and just use those measurements and adapt them slightly for the type of rifle I'm building. But if I was doing this for any other customer, if I can actually meet with them in person, I'll actually measure them myself. If I can't actually meet with them, then I send out a worksheet like this. And there's actually a couple different worksheets in here. This one's the body measurements. Page behind it is a questionnaire on physical specifics, and then there's a sheet in there for, you know, if he has a custom rifle that's already been fitted, to take those measurements. So you know, generally a lot of my customers are spread out all over, and not too many of them actually get to come to me, and I don't usually get to go to them. So usually this is done through the mail with a measurement sheet. There's several other gun companies that use basically the same formula. I was trying to remember, I think it's either Rigby or Purdy, one of them on their website has basically this same setup on their website, and you can go into their website and look it up, and it'll tell you basically how to take all these same measurements off your body. And then they use a similar set of formulas to convert those measurements into actual stock measurements. So the way it works is you can find all this information. Like I said, this has been around a long time. The British gun makers, English gun makers have been using this for a couple hundred years at least. You can find this information in, I think there's some of it is in W.W. Greener's book, The Gun and Its Development, and then I know there's a lot of this information is in The Advanced Gunsmith by Howe, and I can't remember whether it's in Volume 1 or Volume 2, but in one of those two volumes there's almost all of this and how to convert the body measurements into stock measurements. But like I said, for this particular gun, I was able to take the measurements off of a gun that was built by the man I apprenticed under, and so that works the best. If it's already fitted, he's already shot that gun, he knows it works for him, those measurements I know will work then. But anyways, so that's how I get this, is I use the old English method, body measurements, use a set of formulas to convert it, and then the physical questionnaire fills in all the blanks. These measurements aren't absolute. A lot of this depends on the physical structure of the person who's going to be shooting the gun. Are they really well built in the chest? Are they, not so well built? Are they tall and thin? Are they short and fat? Are they, there's all these different body types, and so these measurements have to be adjusted, and a lot of that's based on it's just experience, honestly. It's a matter of handling hundreds of guns, knowing how they feel, knowing how they fit, and just really getting an understanding of how the body relates to the gun. And then there's some other things that can be done with physical limitations and changes in the stock to accommodate those. If a guy has neck injuries, back injuries, shoulder injuries, rotator cuff, things like that, finger injuries, those can all be accommodated to some degree in custom fitting a stock. And so the physical questionnaire covers a lot of that information, that what type of body structure do you have, what kind of muscle tone do you have, do you have physical impairments, have you had injuries to your neck, your spine, your shoulders, those kind of things. And so some of those adjustments in a custom rifle can be made to accommodate those disabilities or those injuries, but a lot of that doesn't, you're going to find that information in a book, so to speak. A lot of that information is just garnered by building gun stocks, handling and feeling and fitting lots of gun stocks. Put them up to your shoulder, see how they shoot, handle them in different positions. And then the other part of making a custom rifle is the type of rifle you're building. Obviously a late period English gun like what I'm building here, late 1800s, mid to late 1800s English cartridge gun, is going to be different than a 1650s sporting rifle from Germany, or from a Kentucky rifle, or from the flintlocks, the caplocks, to the later cartridge guns. American style is going to be slightly different than English or European style guns. Different parts of Europe have different schools of gun making. Germans are obviously considerably different in their stock design than English. So these measurements work to get the general structure, but then they have to be adapted and fitted to the custom build you're doing. And there's really no easy way to describe how that's done exactly. It's just a matter of experience that teaches you how to do that stuff. And then of course there's other issues to consider as well. This is a double rifle, very large caliber. Its primary design would be for Africa. Typically warm weather, usually in short thin shirts, no extra padding or anything. So this gun, stock length can be slightly longer than if it was going to be a gun for hunting in the north, or in the Alaska or Canada or something like that, where you're going to be hunting in cold weather and you're going to have more clothing on and take up some of that stock length with clothing. So those adjustments have to be made considering what the gun's actually designed and used for as well. So the idea is these guns, when you're talking about custom building a gun, there's no absolute that says one gun fitted to the customer is going to work in every possible situation he could use it in. What you have to do is build to the specification of the gun for what it's primarily going to be used for. So anyways, that's kind of the gist of how I do custom work and how I get the measurements and stuff. Like I said, this one was pretty easy because this one comes from, the measurements for this one come from a fitting that's already been done on a gun that he's already used and knows that it fits. So that's how this will be built, is it'll be built to match those similar measurements. I like working in all this natural light from my big bay windows in my shop here, but it's wreaking havoc with my camera trying to get good video here. Way too much backlight behind this, so I'm having to kind of hold a lamp and show you this stuff. But the first part of the inletting process is I'm going to inlet the action and tang to the stock, and these shoulders here, the shoulder at the back here and the shoulder up here at this edge, are the primary recoil shoulders. They're going to take the brunt force of every shot, and so they need to be done really super tight, and they need to be done really precision. And when I'm all done with inletting this, tang and all, the inletting needs to be really good anyways for quality purposes, but it needs to be really good for recoil purposes. And then because this is all open end grain stock all the way down this, what I'll do is when this is all inlet, the main action body and the bottom tang and top tang are all inlet properly, I'm going to go ahead and glass bed these in so that it seals up that end grain. That'll help with humidity, weather, moisture, shrinking and contracting and expanding of wood over time and stuff like that. So hopefully it'll make the gun last a lot longer. But this is kind of a slow, painstaking process to do a good inletting job. It doesn't happen fast, and even after more than a decade of doing this stuff, I'm still not, measurably faster at it than I was a decade ago. I really just take my time and go slow with this. And it's just a matter of working it down in there with some, what I use is Prussian blue, and work it down in and make it fit as tight as possible. So this stock, like I said before, is oversized, and so it's gonna have a lot of material to remove when I'm all said and done. I'll show you what I mean here. See if I can change the camera angle for you a little bit here, and I'll try and show you what I'm talking about. You can see that there is excess wood both top and bottom of this, so I'll have to inlet a little deeper down into it, and it'll leave excess both top and bottom. But what that allows me to do is then I can shape and contour the wood right up to the edges of the metal fit, and it'll make it look seamless when I'm all done. The very first step though, before I can even start inletting this, is these tang edges need to be drafted just a little bit so that they so that they're narrower on the inside than they are at the outside. The reason for that is as you go down into it, you want it to pull down in tight, and the only way to do that, to get a nice clean edge at the surface, is to have the top edge wider than the bottom edge. So I'll have to start by drafting these edges just a little bit, and that's a little bit of file work to do, and then I'll be able to start inletting. And the one thing that's really important when you're drafting this stuff, when you start filing this down and drafting this, it's really important to really polish those edges out and to make your draft lines run perpendicular to the part you're inletting. The reason is if you try and draft these longitudinally and parallel to the surface edges, you'll end up with little micro grooves in the metal. And so when you go to pop it back out in between, put it in, check your fit, pop it back out, remove some metal or remove some wood, put it back in. Well, as you're popping it in and out, if your grooves, those little micro grooves that are left from drafting this, will actually bite into the wood just a little bit, and when you go to pop it back out, it'll tear the top edges loose. So in order to prevent that, these all have to be polished, but they have to be polished perpendicular to the surface so that when you go in and out with it, it's not having any grooves that can catch into the wood. So that's what I'll start doing today, is working on drafting these edges, and then I'll start inletting. So the first step in inletting this is to inlet for the offset shoulders here. And the way I did this, in order to get a really guaranteed that this is going to be square to the outside and straight and true, was to start by building a jig here. And you can see it's just a basic box, clamps over the top of it, and then I was able to use my plunge router to open that hollow up. But you'll notice, if you look at the layout lines on here, it doesn't come clear out to the edge of the layout lines, so it's not quite to width. Won't fit in there, obviously. And it's also not quite to depth. It's a little shallow yet, and that's so that I can make it shoulder tight all the way around and know that everything's going to be a full bearing surface when I'm done. So that's the first step in inletting this, is to get a good start on the square shoulders and the depth, and then I'll come in and start working this down with chisels and cleaning this up until I get a perfect fit on it. And of course this will have to be radiused here, and then this shoulder here will have to be radiused, all to match the contours inside the metalwork. So that's where I'm at, and I'll get on with it.